My greetings to everyone. I am Professor Namita Rajput, Professor in Department of Commerce, Sri Aurobindo College, University of Delhi. In the ongoing series of corporate governance, today we are going to talk on a very pertinent issue after we have discussed the corporate scandals, that what are the international codes for the corporate governance. So, let us see the introduction part of it. The international codes such as Sarbanes-Oxley Act and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development principles, they play a very pivotal role in shaping the global business practices and the regulatory framework. First, we will be talking about Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This was enacted in 2002 in response to corporate scandals like Enron, WorldCom. So, SOX, that is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, aims to protect the investors by improving the accuracy and the reliability of the corporate disclosure. Let us see what the key provisions are all about. They include the requirement for the corporate governance, financial reporting, international control, internal control and the audit committee independence. Section 404 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act is particularly significant, requiring the management and the auditors to assess and report on the effectiveness of internal control over the financial reporting, that is ICFR. This particular act applies primarily to the companies listed on the US Stock Exchange, but its influence extends globally as many multinational corporations adhere to its standards to maintain the investor trust and comply with the regulatory expectations. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that is OECD principles. The OECD principles is an international organization composed of 38 member countries founded to promote the policies that improve the economic and social well-being worldwide. The OECD Principles of Corporate Governance, first established in 1999 and revised in 2015, it served as a benchmark for the corporate governance framework globally. Now, these principles, they cover the areas like the shareholder rights, equitable treatment of the shareholders, disclosure and transparency, and the responsibilities of the board. While not legally binding, the OECD principles, they provide the guidance for the policy makers, regulators, investors and the corporations, promoting the best practices and fostering the trust in the financial markets. Many countries have incorporated the OECD principles into their corporate governance codes or the regulations, aligning their practices with the international standards and facilitating the cross-border investments. Both Sarbanes-Oxley Act and the OECD principles, they aim to enhance the transparency, accountability and the integrity in the corporate governance and the financial reporting, contributing to the stability and the trustworthiness of the global financial systems. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, enacted in 2002, contains very important provisions which are aimed at enhancing the corporate governance, transparency and accountability. So, the SOX established the PCAOB to oversee the auditing profession, including registering the public accounting firms, setting the auditing standards, conducting the inspections and enforcing the compliance with the law and the professional standards. That is, we are now talking about the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, that is PCAOB. Then comes the corporate responsibility. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act mandates that CEOs and the CFOs of the publicly traded companies, they certify the accuracy and the completeness of their financial statements and disclosures. It holds that the corporate executives personally liable for the accuracy of the financial reports, imposing the penalties, including the fine and imprisonment for the willful violations. Then comes the financial disclosure. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act requires the companies to provide timely and accurate financial information to the investors and the regulators. It enhances the transparency by mandating the disclosures regarding the off-balance sheet transactions, the related party transactions, and the material changes in the financial condition or the operations. Internal control. Section 404 of the Surveillance-Auxiliary Act requires the management and the auditors to assess and report on the effectiveness of internal control over the financial reporting. The company must identify and document the key provisions, implement the adequate control, and assess their effectiveness in preventing and detecting the material misstatements in the financial reporting. The Audit Committee independence. The Surveillance-Auxiliary Act mandates that the public companies have independent audit committees composed of the members who are not affiliated with the company. The audit committee oversees the company's financial reporting process, internal control, and the external audit process, enhancing the integrity of the financial reporting. Now, the key provisions of the Surveillance-Auxiliary Act, the whistleblower protection. The Surveillance-Auxiliary Act provides the protection for the whistleblowers who report the violations of the security laws, accounting fraud, or other misconduct. It prohibits the retaliation against the employees who report such violations and establishes the procedures for handling the whistleblower complaints. Now, these provisions of the Surveillance-Auxiliary Act, it aims to restore the investor confidence, prevent the corporate fraud and accounting standards and the scandals, and improve the integrity and the transparency of the financial reporting among the publicly traded companies in the United States. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that is OECD key principles, now we will be discussing. Now, OECD principle provides a comprehensive framework for the corporate governance practices. So, here are some key principles outlined in OECD corporate governance principles. The first is ensuring the basis for an effective corporate governance framework. This principle emphasizes the importance of establishing an effective legal, regulatory, and the institutional framework for the corporate governance. It advocates for a very clear and the transparent rules and the regulations that protect the shareholders' rights and promote the market integrity. Now, as far as the key principles of OECD corporate governance is concerned, now we will be discussing the rights of the shareholders. The shareholders should have the right to participate effectively in the corporate governance, including the voting rights, access to information, and the opportunity to participate in the key decisions. The principle underscores the importance of equitable treatment of the shareholders regardless of their size or the ownership structure. The equitable treatment of the shareholders. The companies should ensure the equitable treatment of all the shareholders, including the minority and the foreign shareholders. Now, this principle emphasizes the importance of preventing the abuse of the minority shareholders and ensuring a fair treatment in the corporate transactions. Now, the role of the stakeholders in the corporate governance. The stakeholders including the employees, creditors, and the communities. They should have their interest appropriately considered in the corporate governance. The companies should establish the mechanism for engaging with the stakeholders and addressing their legitimate concern. Disclosure and transparency. The companies should disclose the relevant and the material information in a timely and accurate manner to ensure the transparency. The principle advocates for the clear and comprehensive disclosure of the financial and non-financial information, including the corporate governance practices. The responsibilities of the board. The board of directors, they play a very central role in the corporate governance, providing the strategic direction, oversight and accountability. The boards act in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders, exercising the independent judgment and overseeing the management effectively. Now, ensuring the appropriate flow of the information and accountability, effective communication and accountability mechanism should be established between the board, management and the shareholders. Now, this principle, it emphasizes the importance of the regular reporting, internal control systems and the independent audits to ensure the accountability. The need for effective risk management. The companies should establish a robust risk management framework to identify, assess and mitigate the risk effectively. The board should oversee the company's risk management process and ensure that they are integrated into the strategic decision making. The key principles of the OECD corporate governance, it provides a framework for promoting the transparency, accountability and integrity in the corporate practices, thereby enhancing the investor confidence and contributing to the sustainable economic growth. Now, we will be talking about the compliance requirements under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Now, this Act imposes several compliance requirements on publicly traded companies in the United States to enhance the financial transparency, accountability and the corporate governance. So, here are some of the key compliance requirements under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Section 302, the corporate responsibility for financial reports. The CEO, that is the Chief Executing Officer and the Chief Financial Officers, CFOs, they must certify the accuracy and the completeness of their company's quarterly and the annual financial reports. They are required to confirm the reports comply with the Security and Exchange Commission regulations and fairly present the financial condition and results of the operations of the company. Section 404, Management Assessment of Internal Control. Management must assess and report on the effectiveness of the internal control over the financial reporting, that is ICFR. Now, this involves documenting and testing the internal control to ensure that they are designed and operating effectively to prevent and detect the material misstatement in the financial reporting. Section 401, it discloses in the periodic reports. The companies are required to disclose all material off-balance sheet transactions, arrangements, obligations, including the contingent obligations and the other relationship of the companies with unconsolidated entities or the other persons. Now, these disclosures under the compliance requirement of Sarbanes-Oxley Act, they aim to provide the investor with a very clear picture of the company's financial obligations and the potential risk. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act Section 404 deals with the auditor attestation. The external auditors are required to attest to and report on the management assessment of the effectiveness of ICFR. Now, this particular section involves conducting an audit of the company, internal control and providing an opinion on whether they are operating effectively to ensure the reliability of the financial reporting. Section 409, that is the real-time disclosure. The companies must disclose the material changes in their financial conditions or the operations on a real-time basis. This requirement ensures that the investors have the access to timely information that they may impact their investment decisions. Now comes section 802, that is, what are the criminal penalties for altering the documents. The Surveillance Auxiliary Act imposes the criminal penalties, including the fines and imprisonment, for knowingly altering, destroying, concealing, or falsifying the records, documents, or the tangible objects with the intent to obstruct or influence a legal investigation. Section 906, that is the criminal penalties for the certifications. The chief executing officers and the chief financial officer who certify the false statements can be subject to the criminal penalties, including the fine and imprisonment for willful violations of SOX certification requirements. Now, the compliance with these SOX requirement is a mandatory condition for all publicly traded companies in the United States, with the penalties for non-compliance ranging from monetary fines to the criminal prosecutions. Now, implementing and maintaining the effective internal controls and the corporate governance practices are definitely essential for meeting the SOX compliance obligations and maintaining the investor confidence. Implementing the Sarbanes-Oxley Act can pose several challenges for the publicly traded companies. Some of the key implementation challenges are as follows. The first is the cost. The compliance with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act can be very expensive, particularly for the smaller compliance with the limited resources. The cost associated with implementing and maintaining the internal control, conducting the audits, and complying with the reporting requirements can actually refrain a company's financial resources. Then comes the complexity. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act compliance involves navigating the complex regulatory requirement and the standards like Section 404 assessment of the internal control. Now, implementing the challenges of this particular act. Understanding and interpreting these requirements can be very challenging, especially for the companies with the limited experience or the expertise in the financial reporting and the corporate governance. The resource allocation. Implementing this act often requires a significant time and the effort from the management, internal audit teams, and the external auditors. Allocating sufficient resources to ensure the compliance while also managing the day-to-day business operations can be a balancing act for the companies. The risk management. Identifying and mitigating the risk to the financial reporting effectively is very essential for the Sarbanes-Oxley Act compliance. However, assessing and managing the risk across the various business process and the systems can be a daunting task, particularly in the complex organizations with multiple subsidiaries or the business units. Change of the management. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act implementation often necessitates the change to the existing process, systems, and the organization structures. Now, managing these changes effectively, including the training of the employees on the new procedures and the systems, communicating the changes across the organization, and gaining buy-in from the stakeholders can be very challenging. Documenting and reporting. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act requires the extensive documentation of the policies, procedures, control, and the audit trails. Maintaining the accurate and up-to-date documentation and preparing a detailed reports for the internal and external stakeholders can be very time-consuming and resource-intensive. The auditor independence and the expertise is another challenge. The companies must engage the external auditors to perform the audit of their financial statements and the internal control. Ensuring the independence and the expertise of the auditor, as well as managing the audit process effectively, is definitely very crucial for achieving the particular Surveillance Act compliance. Now comes the important challenge of the global operations. The multinational companies operating in multiple jurisdictions, they face additional challenges in reconciling the SOX requirements with the local regulatory requirements and the cultural differences. Harmonizing the compliance effort across the different locations while accommodating the local variations can be very complex. Next come the continuous monitoring and the improvement. The Surveillance Auxiliary Act compliance is an ongoing process that requires a continuous monitoring, evaluation and improvement of the internal control and the corporate governance practices. Now, maintaining a culture of the compliance and accountability over the long term can be very challenging for the companies. Addressing these implementation challenges requires a concentrated effort from the companies with support from the senior manager, board of directors, internal audit teams, external advisors and other stakeholders. Despite the challenges, effective Surveillance Auxiliary Act compliance can ultimately enhance the transparency, accountability and the investor confidence in financial markets. Now, let us see what impact the Surveillance Auxiliary Act is on the corporate governance. Now, this particular act has had a profound impact on the corporate governance practices in publicly traded companies in the United States. So, we will be talking about some key ways this particular act has influenced the corporate governance. The first is enhanced accountability and responsibility. The Surveillance Auxiliary Act has significantly increased the accountability of the senior executives, particularly the Chief Executive Officer and Chief Financial Officer, by requiring them to personally certify the accuracy and the completeness of the financial reports. This accountability helps ensure the top executives and are directly responsible for the integrity of the financial statements. Improved internal control. One of the most significant impact of this particular act is the emphasis on the robust internal control over the financial reporting. Section 404 mandates that the companies implement, document and regularly test internal control to prevent and detect the fraud and errors. This has led to a more stringent control environments and improved reliability of the financial reporting. Strengthened board governance and the audit committees. The Surveillance Auxiliary Act requires the audit committees be composed of the independent directors and possess the financial expertise. This not only strengthens the oversight role of the board, but also ensures that the audit committee are better equipped to oversee the financial reporting process and the external audit. Greater transparency and disclosure. The Act mandates increased transparency in the financial reporting, including a real-time disclosure of the material changes in the financial condition and off-balance sheet transaction. So, enhanced disclosure requirement will help the investors make more informed decisions and improve the market confidence. Thank you so much.